Hello, I'm Lizelle Sambry, and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all things writing, traditional publishing, and a little bit of reading. And today I am doing an update to my plotter review. So link down in the description, I will have it. I did a video where I reviewed Plottr, which is a plotting / world building software. This was very comprehensive. I also kind of jumped in and showed you the interface. I showed some blurred / footage of a book I was working on, which is actually the book that became Tender Beasts, which is my YA novel coming out this year. But I shared how I had organized that in Plottr and kind of how I use the program, and just kind of shared whether or not I would recommend it to other people, that sort of thing. So if you haven't watched that video first, I recommend going down to that video and watching it, because it's a more comprehensive overview of what Plottr is and how you can use it. And this video is an update to basically talk after I've used Plottr for over a year now, to talk about kind of the new features that have popped up that I've really been enjoying, changes to how I've decided to use Plottr, how I've changed from how I used it back then to how I'm using it now, things that I would like to see the program have added to it, and kind of whether I still recommend it and I still think that this is like a really good plotting software. And so that is what this video is all about. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's talk about some of the new features in Plottr. So new features that have been added since I made that original video that I've really been enjoying and taking advantage of. Plottr has added actually like a very large amount of new features, but these are the ones that I use and I think are really good. And so the first is the filtering of plot lines in the outline view. So that outline view, this is where you can see all of your little timeline cards and scene cards in kind of this like chronological order by chapter or what have you, however you've organized it. So before you had to look at everything all at once, now you can filter it. So I can look, for example, if I want to look at my main character's plot line, the chapter summary, and like one other thing. Say I just want to work on red herrings that day, so I just want to look at the red herring sections. I can filter it so that I can look just at that, which is nice because then you can kind of really focus in on one element and work on kind of one thing at a time, but still getting that kind of chronological chapter by chapter view, which I found to be really helpful. The next big one is the ability to use a hierarchical organizational structure. This has been really huge for me. So when this feature first came out, I admit that it was not great. It was not working great, and so I wasn't using it, but I feel like a lot of things have been ironed out now, and so now it works really, really well, which has been great for me because I have been able to organize based on the same way that I organize things in Scrivener. So I separate everything based on the Save the Cat beats. And so I have the Save the Cat beats at the top, and then I'm able to put the chapters within each beat on the bottom, and then I put the individual scenes under that, which I like because it gives me a lot of focus. So I can be like, oh, what am I working on? I'm working on the debate section, or where's the debate section? And then I can immediately pinpoint it in that organization. I can see all the chapters within it. I can kind of count too if I'm like, I only want this many chapters in this beat, and this is actually like one chapter too many. It's easy for me to organize based on that way. And I also have been enjoying being able to break it down by scene level, because then I can kind of see when a chapter has one or two scenes within it, and kind of if there's too many scenes within, if there's too many like 2-scene chapters happening at once, or like a chapter has like 3 scenes or something, which I usually find that if a chapter has 3 scenes, I'm like, that's a little bit much. So I can kind of decide if that's necessary. And it's also great for planning, because I can plan really specifically in that, like, okay, this is what's happening in this scene. This is what's happening in this scene. And I really like being able to do that. So I've really appreciated having that hierarchical structure. The ability to pin plot lines. This is something that's kind of really simple, but it makes a big difference, because because, you know, you have kind of like your main, or at least I put my main plot line at the top, and then I would scroll down and I would want to see things underneath, but the main plot line would disappear. Now I can pin it and I can scroll down to all my different timelines and see everything all at once, which I find to be very, very useful. We also have different character profiles for different books in the series. I will say that this particular feature is a little, at least it needs a little shaping still, but I do really like the prospect of it, which is that they have this world building section where you can do character profiles, and now you can do different character profiles for different books in your series. So for example, in like book 1 of a series, like your character may have, you know, one sort of journey, and so when you jump to the next book in the series, you can change and have a new profile for them based on what they're doing in that series. Also, some characters just appear in one book and don't appear in another book, so then you can have their profile in one book and not have their profile in the next book. Also, some characters, you know, they kick the bucket, so to speak, and so they're not in other books, and so you can do that. And it's nice organizationally too, because then you can see everyone that's in that specific book. But really, I think like a big part of it is being able to edit that journey, because your character isn't going to have the exact same journey in every single book. I should hope not. And so it's nice to be able to adjust that individually and be able to go into the next book and be like, okay, now this is what my character's doing, and being able to change that going forward. So I find those are very good. I will talk about this a little bit later when I talk about how I'd like to see this feature kind of fixed a little bit. But those are new features that have been added since I did my original review that I've really enjoyed having in Plottr, and I think have really kind of leveled up the software. Now I'm going to talk about changes in the way that I have used Plottr. So I was using it in a specific way in that first kind of review that you saw, and since then I've kind of made some changes to how I'm using the system, and so I thought I would talk about those and kind of why I started doing that. So the first is in the plot lines that I used. So it's each of those kind of horizontal lines. Previously, I tried to use kind of as few as possible, and that was really so that the timeline wouldn't become overwhelming to look at, because I have like so many different plot lines. And instead, I found that it was actually just better to use as many as possible. It was just more helpful because I could really break down each section of the story further, and so that's something that I ended up doing. For example, this really exerted itself more clearly in terms of character arcs and that sort of thing. So I used to not do a kind of character arc plot line for a bunch of characters. I would just leave it, but I ended up changing that, and now I do a character arc plot line for all of the major characters. And yes, that is more work, but to me it's more helpful because then I can see the arc over the book for all of those characters. And I used to just be like, I don't know, I guess I'll like hold that in my head for some reason because I didn't want to have all those plot lines. But I just find that it's more helpful that like for anything that I need to plan, to just make a separate plot line and plan it that way, even if it's just going to be like one sentence things here or there, because it just helps me focus more. It just helps make it a little bit more clear. I also changed in that I used to have what I called kind of like the main character point of view, and that would encompass both the main character's character arcs plus everything that happened plot-wise in that chapter, and I found it just to be a little bit too much to have in one section together. And so in the spirit of using more plot lines, I ended up separating that out. So now I kind of have one plot line that I use which says the summary of the chapter, so like everything plot-wise that is going on in the chapter, and sometimes those include things that's relevant to the character's arc, especially because the way that I plan out stories is based on the character's journey. And so often it will make some sort of comment on the character's journey, but I still have that separate plot line that is just for the arc of the main character, just to help me give that extra focus into this is what is happening internally for the main character at that moment, as it is specifically relevant to their journey, that isn't also mixed up in the date was this, and this is exactly what happened in the chapter, which I find to be really helpful. And so for me, that strategy of just like employing as many plot lines as I need has been much more helpful than trying to pare them down and restrict them. But I also say kind of like, you know, I guess sort of within reason, but I still find this to be the most helpful. And I think this has changed even since I did my workshop with the Fold, which I will link down below. I did a workshop with the Fold about how to do layered plotting, in which I used Plotter in order to plan all of that out. And so I will link that down below if you want to be able to see that more clearly, because that one doesn't have the sort of censoring that I had to do for my original Plotter review. So in that workshop, you can also kind of see the way that I'm using Plotter kind of in a more specific context. And the final big thing that I changed about using Plotter is that I started to take advantage of the world building features, which I had previously ignored largely. So Plotter has a section in which you can do places, so you can do the different locations within the setting, and then they also have that section for character where you can do profiles for all of your characters. And previously I was doing this in Scrivener, and even when I first started using Plotter, I felt that like, oh, it's still better to do this in Scrivener, and then I decided that it was not. So for one, the big thing in Plotter for me is that it integrates with the timeline. And so what I found is that I have that timeline where I do like a plot summary for every single chapter. And so I say the date and I say everything that happened in that chapter. But what I can also do is when I have those different places, I can also tag the chapter for the different settings that are in that specific scene or chapter. And then I can also tag the different characters that are in that scene or chapter, which is really, really helpful for me, because when I'm going in and I'm editing, for example, I did an edit where I wanted to add in more romance into A Mastery of Monsters, which is my 2025 YA Dark Academia fantasy that's coming out. So I wanted to add in more romance. And so it was really easy for me to filter the entire timeline based on which chapters is the male love interest in. And then I could see every chapter that he was in, and then I could go in, I could be like, oh, let me add him to more chapters so I can create more opportunities for romance. And then the chapters he was in, I could easily pinpoint and be like, okay, I'm gonna up the romance in this section, I'm gonna do this or that. And so it was really helpful. There was also a note I got from my editor about two friends and like wanting to see more of their friendship. And so I was able to filter by where's each chapter that the two of those characters are in, so that I can pump up their friendship for every section. And it just made it a lot more streamlined. Certainly I could have just like looked through the chapters manually and been like, okay, this is where they are. But just having that system in place organizationally for me is so helpful. It's also really helpful because it showed me some kind of like missed spots. So for example, I had a chapter and I could see all the characters in it, and I was like, oh, why isn't this character in this chapter? They really should be in this chapter, and it's kind of weird that they're not. And so I was able to do an edit where I was like, okay, I'm gonna add this character to this specific chapter, or even sometimes where a character would be tagged in a chapter and I'd be like, oh my gosh, I kind of forgot they were in that scene, in which case I need to bring them more to the forefront, or I need to cut them from the scene entirely. And so to me, I found it to have a lot of really helpful potential in terms of editing and revisions and just being more organized in that way. Also helpful for places and being like, am I repeating this setting too much? Or if I wanted to be like, where are all the times where they were in this specific setting, I have the tag, and so I can see it really easily. And so I find those world building features to be really, really helpful. It's also kind of nice to have everything in one place, but again, now that they have that series function where you can change character profiles over series, that's also something that's really helpful and a really helpful tool. And so I feel like when I first started using Plotter, I really underestimated those world building features, and now I'm really really seeing them for how helpful they are, and how much they've kind of also been improved as you go on as well. And these are some of the features that I would like to see in Plottr, or that I think could really improve this program. I could really go on about these forever, but these are some of the things where I think would really kind of elevate the software and make it even better. And so one of those would be a split screen. And I might have even talked about this in my initial video. There really needs to be a way that you can look at the world building sections and then also look at your timeline at the same time, because it helps with the planning, and being able to do that. I suspect that maybe if I did something really complicated on my computer, I could maybe like make this do it, but I wish it would just be a native part of the app, in just being able to split those screens and see both at the same time, because sometimes I'm planning out a character arc on the timeline and it would be helpful to see the character profile at the same time and be able to do those two things. Also being able to hide timelines. So even though you have that sort of filter and hide function in the outline view, that function is not copied over to the timeline view. And so you're kind of forced to see all of the things on your timeline all at once. And so even though you can see it in outline view filtered that way, it would be nice to also see it in the timeline view. And then the other thing I would mention, and this is what I talked about a little bit when I talked about that character series thing and like why that needs some shaping. And so the way it is now is that you have your full character profiles that you filled out for book 1, but then you shift to book 2 and all of the character profiles are kind of like, they copy over all the ones you have, but they don't copy over the content. So everything is blank. And to me, like, that's not necessarily helpful for like a main character with like their kind of basic things aren't really going to change. I just want to tweak some of the things. But that is something that Plottr is already aware of and is working on. And I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about like, would I recommend Plottr? But that is something that they have already kind of flagged as like a thing to fix and are actively working on it. And then the kind of last thing that I would love to see from Plottr would be a calendar function. This would really take Plottr, like, it would change the game, for me, would be to have a calendar function. So I've really struggled with like calendars for my books. I've tried various things. I've tried doing like a completely blank calendar in Microsoft Word. I've tried doing a Google calendar on top of my like existing Google calendars. I have tried just like writing out dates as like a line by line format, and then I've gotten to where I'm currently at, in which I use a Notion calendar in order to do the calendars for my project. But it would be amazing to, in Plottr, have a timeline calendar where you could plug in things that already exist on your timeline and plug them into that calendar and be able to see all of the dates that way, dates and times. That would be super helpful. That would be amazing. So hopefully in the future. A year, or really more than a year later of using Plottr, do I still recommend it? And the answer is yes, absolutely yes. Plottr has really absolutely changed everything for me in the terms of like how I plot and I plan my projects. It is so invaluable to me, because I just can't picture a scenario anymore in which I do not use this program to plan out my books. It is so helpful. It is so necessary for me now. It is just an integral part of my entire process. Very, very important. But for everyone else, for people that haven't already been, really sucked into this Plottr thing, I do still find it to be really helpful, and I recommend at least giving it a try. So it does have a free trial, and I recommend trying out the free trial and seeing how it works for you, because there are also a lot of different ways you can use it. You don't just have to use it like the way that I am using it. And I admit that there is a learning curve. There is a learning curve. Like when you first get into Plottr, I do find it to be confusing. And it's very like, because it's so open in what you can do, it feels like you get in there and you're like, okay, what am I supposed to do now? And they have a lot of templates, which is really like helpful in like templates for story structure and that sort of thing. So you can kind of have a bit of a starting point in seeing, okay, I guess I could use it this sort of way. And I find that to be really helpful, but there is a bit of a curve in where you figure out how you are going to make this system work for you. But I find that once you have figured out your system, it is really invaluable. It is really helpful for planners. Like if you are a planner, a plotter, like if you are a person that wants to plan things ahead of time, I feel like this is very much the program for you. I really can't speak on if you are more of a headlights writer or discovery writer. I don't really know how that would work for you. I've always been a very well, I haven't always been, but for a lot of my writing career, I've been very like focused on planning things out, and I've found that to be the most helpful way for me to work. And so I think if you are a planner, then yes, I would recommend Plottr. I will note that all of my feelings about Plottr in this way are related to the desktop version of Plottr. I have tried the mobile version and I didn't really care for it. They do still regularly do updates to the mobile version, but I just found it, for me, it wasn't really helpful. It wasn't doing the same things as the desktop version. And usually when I'm working on planning my books, I'm not in a situation in which I would not have my laptop and be using a kind of desktop version. I wouldn't plan on a mobile version anyway. And so I will say that this is really specific to the desktop version. I don't know that I like the mobile version. I think the mobile version is kind of like worth a try to see if you really want to use a mobile version, but I just don't really like it. And I feel like I felt the same about Scrivener. I don't like the Scrivener mobile version either. I think I just don't care for mobile versions of these like more complicated writing softwares if they're not going to be the exact same as the desktop version. And that's the thing, they're not the exact same as the desktop version. They have to make these adjustments for being on a mobile platform, and I just don't really care for how those adjustments are made. I also think Plottr as a software specifically has been so amazing about listening to their community and adding features based on what people are asking for. So they have this whole kind of roadmap on their website, and this roadmap shows you the things that they are like considering adding to the program, things that they're planning adding to the program, and things that they are actively working on adding to the program. And these things are being chosen based on community requests. So people from the community go on the forums and they request a feature. You can like upvote it and be like, yeah, I really want to see this. And these are things that they're actively implementing. And to me, this is like very mind-blowing because for one, it shows that they are really listening to what people want to see in the program, and then they are showing you with like a lot of transparency exactly what they are going to be adding and looking at. So if there's a feature and you're like, I really want this, you can kind of go and see and be like, oh, okay, they're working on it, or they have it in planning phases, or they don't have it, but let me write it in and see if this is something they might add in the future. And I find that to be really, really cool, and they really do follow through with it. I think a lot of features that I was like, oh, it would be cool to have this, they have eventually added, and I feel like I have a lot of faith in Plottr as a program, as a company, that they are going to add features that I want to see. So if there's something I want to see, I have a lot of faith that eventually Plottr will add it. And it's nice because then I can go on that roadmap website and I can kind of be like, are they working on it? Is it on their radar? Is it happening? And see that. And I find that to be really, really helpful, really, really great, because it shows that the program is continually evolving, which I don't always see with some other programs. Certainly not that kind of degree of transparency, which I find to be really helpful. But I feel like Plottr overall as a program, it's in some ways a little bit similar to Scrivener in that there are probably a lot of features and you're not going to use all of them. You're just not going to use all of them, but you can start from a basic level and slowly add on what you're using. Like I said, I originally started and I wasn't really using any of those world building features, and that was something that I started using and added on over time, and it's really enriched my use of the program. But for example, like the templates, I don't really use a lot of the templates. I'm set in my ways. I like to use my own system and my own templates. But for other people, there is a ridiculous amount of story structure templates, for character arc building templates, setting templates. There's all sorts of like templates. So if you are someone that I think is like a little bit, you know, if you're newer to writing or you're wanting more structure to be added to your writing, I think it's really helpful in that way, because you can use these templates as like this starting base for structuring your story. So it's not only a tool for structuring, it's a tool that can help teach you structure and teach you how to put those things together, which I also find to be really, really helpful and really great. And so I absolutely very much recommend Plottr if you are a person that either likes planning currently or you want to try being a more kind of plotting oriented sort of writer. And I'll recommend it with that caveat, because I really can't say how this might be used if you're a discovery writer, because I'm not, and so I can't really say what you might do and if that would be helpful or useful for you, or if that would create the same sort of issues as like planning in general might, or planning in that sort of specific way might. So yeah, so absolutely I recommend Plottr in that way. I very much look forward to what other new features they are going to be adding, and I just think it's a fantastic program for plotting. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe. And thank you so much for watching. Bye!